Morning and welcome to the Brazilian American Chamber of Commerce's webinar on the new foreign exchange law and renewables. I am John Welch, the Executive Director of the Brazilian American Chamber, and on behalf of the Chamber, we wish you all health and happiness during this cold patch.
Hi, John. Good morning, everybody. Welcome. I'd like to start off thanking the Chamber for the opportunity to talk about one of the main concerns of foreign investments in Brazil, which is foreign exchange. Historically, Brazil had several restrictions in place, which created a complicated environment for foreign investments in Brazil. However, since 2005, the Brazilian government has been introducing some changes that have been helping the market and improving the sector. Example of those changes, relaxation of the rules for purchase of foreign currency by Brazil residents, and the assignment of the obligation from the Central Bank of Brazil to the private sector to financial institutions authorized to operate by the Central Bank of Brazil to verify the legality and the substance economic of the transactions. However, there are still some very important restrictions in place. One of them is the fact that agreements providing for payments in in foreign currency like US dollars are considered null and void under Brazilian legislation, except for certain specific situations set forth in the Brazilian legislation, such as, for example, export and export transactions could be in US dollars, or loans or other obligations in which the creditor or the debtor is located outside of Brazil. So the exceptions, I would say, are still very limited.
I faced that discussion of indexation of PPAs. We saw a long time ago, for those that are a little bit old, the discussions for Petrobras thermal power plants that we started with specific projects that we were able to index the PPAs to dollars as well. But for several reasons, I would say that for many years that was not applicable anymore, until Ballester came to me with this problem, with ideas, and asked us to work together with the team and find a solution that we could face for this specific issue of indexation. As Thales mentioned, we have this limitation under Brazilian law that agreements between parties in Brazil have to be denominated in reais, with few exceptions that were described in this decree that is a very old decree. One of these exceptions is if you transfer to a Brazilian counterparty an obligation that you have with an offshore entity. And the other exception is the possibility that if one of the parties is located outside of Brazil, that agreement can also be denominated in other currencies. So we worked together with those two exceptions, and we came up with this solution to index the PPA based on the indirect assignment of the loan from IDB, as well as to have a guarantor of the off-taker that would be another party in the agreement with, of course, substance there and legal grounds for that.
You know, in our discussion, we internally, when this was presented to us, we reviewed it and we saw that there were different interpretations, different viewpoints from different players in the market, different, you know, about these exceptions, whether it fit or whether it did not fit in the current exceptions, and essentially came to the viewpoint that, one, if we're going to do this, we need to have a, you know, a sound counterparty, you know, a significant counterparty who is, you know, really this fits in with their business model and it makes sense for them over the long term. It's not going to be something that they just choose now because it's more beneficial to them, and in a few years they want to switch back to you know, having the electricity prices in BRL. So as you mentioned, we worked on given that fact that even though we believe these off-takers are not going to switch, we still have that risk that management may change. And so we wanted to make sure that, given that we're doing a project finance, and then really our recourse is to those flows from the off-taker and the production of the project, that we wanted to have a direct agreement with the off-taker that basically said, if you ever decide to challenge the indexation, essentially there will be consequences. And because that affects many other people, not only the equity and their potential return, but it also affects the debt, because we provided a project finance loan in dollars, and then all of a sudden it would be switched to having a completely different risk with a different currency and spot prices. So, the focus was really trying to align interest with the off-takers to understand, okay, we're here to finance it. We see the benefit for you. We see the benefit for us. We see the benefit for Atlas, but we need to, we need to have this agreement in place.
So on the Casablanca transaction in particular, it was many months of hard work. I think, Luiz in particular and Jose Prado did a lot of the dirty work, a lot of the more difficult work, structuring around and trying to figure out how we were going to make this fit under the existing, Brazilian law at the time. But I think, really one of the biggest challenges of that deal, and I think, many other sort of limited recourse financings that will hopefully be happening in Brazil in years to come, was really sort of making everyone comfortable with, some of the features that you need in order to have a true, limited recourse financing. And that really was about, sort of the direct agreement, and some of the agreements that the counterparties have to sign and have to agree to in the context of such a financing, right? So obviously all the off-takers and the off-taker in this deal and the other deals we've worked on together with Luiz are very sophisticated. They all have counsel, they have a lot of resources. But many times, the experience in Brazil of true limited recourse financing has been a little more limited. So, bringing everyone on board, making everyone comfortable that, the terms and conditions that, everyone has to agree to are generally, customary or market, more from a global perspective and taking, comparisons and analogies from the other neighboring jurisdictions, I think has also been helpful. But I think that was the biggest challenge, right? I mean, sort of negotiating the direct agreement and this, sort of standalone indemnity agreement that Brian alluded to earlier was probably the most challenging. From a New York law perspective, there were also a lot of questions about how we would make, any payment of damages truly enforceable. Under New York law, there's all kinds of, considerations about whether damages were foreseeable, whether they're adequate, and so on. So we spent a lot of time, sort of thinking about existing New York law and precedent and case law to make sure that everyone was able to get on board with all of this.
The law now says that any agreement that you have an exporter and on the other side you have a holder of a license or a concession of infrastructure projects now can have those agreements denominated in hard currency. So what was a matter of interpretation, because we had to come with all those arguments, it's now very clear that infrastructure projects that you have an exporter as off-taker is explicitly mentioned that the agreement can be denominated in dollars, for instance. So this is the first very important exception. And for the matters of several PPAs, that would be sufficient. But there is another exception that is even broader than that. And the law says that any indirect contract with an exporter can also be denominated in hard currency. There is a reference to what indirect export means to another law. So basically any goods that you provide to an exporter that will use that for the export of materials can also benefit for that exception.
During all this time working in Brazil and structuring cross-border project financing, we have stumbled upon all of these issues altogether. specifically with respect to having in the legislation a specific reference, a specific exception allowing the indexation of contracts. First of all, it will make the due diligence and the structuring of these projects much easier. I'm sure, we have been working with IDB, myself with IDB in particular, way before the project started, in a manner to try to get comfortable with the regulations and with the exceptions, with the sort of documentation that would allow and give security to investors, to the lenders, to essentially accept the agreements existing before the law. So this will this sends a very important signal to the market, to the international market, that the structures are viable, they are legal, they will be upheld by courts. So I'm pretty sure that if there were other lenders or institutions on the fence or considering these structures, they will obviously now come back to the table and feel more comfortable in discussing these structures and financing these structures. The power sector has been traditionally very based on BRL denominated revenues. We've seen this in large gas to power projects and all over the place. So this will bring a lot of optionality. And just just based on experience, just given how lenders and borrowers and sponsors were trying to find a way and went through great lengths to accommodate FX restrictions, tax burdens deriving from different remittances, just the tax applicable to foreign loans in general. I think this will bring great optionality, and in the world that we are, with high interest rates, increasing interest rates, like, this optionality is very welcome.
Obviously, the IDB and IDB Invest are really focused, and part of their key strategies is supporting the maturation of the energy markets, and in terms of also making the energy generation matrix of each country more sustainable, providing more balances. Brazil is wonderful in the sense that a huge percentage of its energy generation comes from large hydro plants, but we can also see that in times of drought, that that creates stresses on the system, and therefore it's really important that we start building out and having the impact of diversifying the energy resources. So for us, we had because we have limited access to Brazilian reais, we've had limited, and also not as competitive as the local development banks, we've had limited impact or limited opportunities to finance projects with revenues principally in BRL. So this is also music to our ears, because we see a double impact in the fact that we find companies who are willing to invest in projects with indexation into US dollars. We have off-takers who are interested in improving their business model, matching up revenues with the expenses, because they're principally exporters into a dollar denominated market. So it is also music to our ears.
And we keep developing projects and solutions for the off-takers, right? In terms of USD PPAs, we have an extensive pipeline of projects that can, house this kind of PPAs, and now that's an interesting point, that the interest rates in Brazil rise, a lot, much higher than the US interest rate. So that's some gap now that can make the solution of the USD PPA more competitive than the Brazilian real denominated PPA. So I believe that we are an interesting point for the off-takers to look for a USD PPA, a long-term PPA. It's an opportunity, to migrate to renewables, to participate of the energy transition with reliable projects, with renewable projects in a maybe more competitive solution than the Brazilian real denominated PPA. So I believe that's an interesting point, right? So in terms of new financing structures, we, as what have been said today, we work with multilateral bank, with IDB in the past, and we are seeing, a movement, a global movement of other multilaterals came in now for Brazil, and bank loans, and maybe in the future, in a short-term future, we can look for private bonds and all kind of markets to supply that in Brazil. All these do, this movement, this law and regulation movement that we saw, consolidating the issuance of the law of the new last year, but also with the improvements in the regulation of the Brazil Central Bank.
I mean, it's really exciting to see. I mean, again, from the word on the street, in New York, I mean, from and globally, right? But you hear, an incredible interest from sponsors and sort of providers of debt. It's incredible excitement and interest in Brazil, right? And that's obviously been building over the years. I think now, with this legislative development, people are even more excited. And then, you have that kind of coming together with this, real, golden era for renewable energy, right? And then, you have other factors to build even on top of that. You have this sort of big demand for energy in sort of the northern part of Brazil, and in particular, coming from the mining and industrial, operations there. So it really does seem that there's going to be a lot of opportunity to do more, to finance and invest in renewable energy, in particular in Brazil, right? So I think, the backbone of using sort of bilateral or private PPAs and hopefully, financing them in US dollars will be something that we'll start to see a lot more of. But again, I think really, what's wonderful to see is the incredible appetite that there has been, and perhaps some people have been a little bit hesitant to make the investment in Brazil for one reason or another. And I think, now a lot of things are coming together where, one would assume that hesitancy will no longer be there, right? And, we sort of, I work across the region generally. I mean, I do a lot of work in Chile, and in other jurisdictions. And, we're sort of seeing this, real interest in all of Latin America, for renewable power initiatives and sort of ESG driven initiatives of various types, right? But in Brazil, what you had mentioned, Jose, on offshore wind, I mean, obviously that'll be, huge, right? I mean, that now in the US has really been, an important area of investment.
No, I mean, the investment that needs to be, held in Brazil, to expand, the matrix, even mainly do transmission is enormous, right? Brazil has, a big transmission system. I believe one of the best of the world, right? Just to give an idea, I always say this, but if you sum all the distance from the transmission lines in Brazil, it's almost a half of the distance from Earth to Moon, right? So that's enormous. The interconnected Brazil system, it's enormous, but obviously there are big demand of energy in different points. Not even, the best, irradiation or wind place is connected on the system, right? That sometimes it's far, sometimes we don't have, capacity to expand, but mainly because in Brazil, the system is projected for the benefit of the whole people, not only for the specific generator. So sometimes people get sad, to connect their parks, but yes, it do need, much more expansion, mainly because the load of Brazil will grow. We have seen, as you said, Thomas, we believe a lot in the green hydrogen load that will increase the demand for energy in Brazil. Brazil is going to be an exporter of these electric cars, that a lot of things that, rebalance, and increase the load. The overall consumption of electricity of the people will also grow, as it grew, in all other regions, right? So the demand for energy, and mainly for renewable energy, it continue to be even more, even bigger, right?
Yeah, I think if I may jump in, it's a very good point that Prado made in terms of the people who are making the investments for infrastructure or long-term investors. It's also key to say that the people who are looking for these PPAs indexed in dollars are also long-term investors. I mean, we see a lot of mining companies. It's not an investment that with fast money that comes in and wants to be pulled out really quickly. These are long-term investments with long-term visions. The fact that, as John mentioned, we have legal stability for the acquired rights in the country, you know, that's perfect for investors to come in and put the money. You know, what I've shared internally, my view, why would companies want to operating in Brazil want to link their electricity cost to dollars? Well, you know, not only we can't necessarily say that it'll be cheaper in dollars. We can't predict the future, but at the very least, it helps with the investment management and the view in the future about matching revenues to expenses and being able to predict how your business is going to perform. So, you know, I think that adds a lot of stability to the operators in the country as well.
As an economist that watched this a long time, I would completely agree with you on that. And the other thing is, I remember going through the debt crisis of the 80s, and you had multinationals depreciating things. You know, they weren't putting net investment, but they stayed there, and they stayed there through the whole thing, and it paid off massively when we got to the 1990s. So that's, you're absolutely right. The clients I had in Canada and the United States looked that way, the longer term. So
yeah, and my final comment in relation to this, John, sorry, is that in terms of concession law, for instance, just to give an example, we had several examples of new politicians that they wanted to change the terms of the concession. So in Rio de Janeiro, Curitiba, and so on. So one wanted to terminate the concession, the other one wanted the tariff to be lower. But the good aspect of this is, in all cases that I can remember, the courts actually preserved the concession law and the investment made by the private party. So the bad aspect that we had the challenges, but the courts actually were in favor and somehow made it stronger.
Well, thank you everybody for joining us. It was a pleasure to be here. I'd like to thank the panelists. I think we had a great discussion here, and we're very happy to share what I believe it is good news to the market, to foreign investors, and to people that are not located in Brazil, because this represents an improvement for the market and a better environment for investments in Brazil. So thank you, everybody, and have a good day.
Now, thank you as well. Thank you, Thales, Jose, John, Thomas, Luiz, and Brian for a timely and excellent discussion. We would also like to again thank our sponsors, Machado, Meyer, and White and Case. And of course, thank you all for joining. Our next scheduled event is a webinar when we start our series on the presidential candidates and their advisors, starting with Minister Enrique Meirelles, Treasury Secretary and Economic Advisor to the Governor of São Paulo, João Dória, on the 2nd of March. Please stay tuned to our website as we may have more events between now and March 2nd. We certainly will have more webinars on the new FX law from a number of different perspectives. Again, thank you all for coming, especially to our members. For those who are not members, please watch the brief video that follows and consider joining the chamber. Until then, stay warm, healthy, and in good spirits.